1405 AD, dawn breaks over the South China Sea. The largest fleet the world has ever seen drifts in silence. 300 ships, their sails pale against the sky. At their head stands a man in silken armor, a Muslim eunuch serving a Confucian emperor. Below deck, sailors whisper that the world itself might end where the water meets the horizon. By dusk, they will prove the world is wider than anyone imagined. This is the story of how one man's voyage carried the Middle Kingdom to the edge of the world and then was forgotten. "40 years earlier, China had shaken off the Mongol Yuan dynasty and crowned a new beginning, the Ming. From the ashes of occupation rose confidence, wealth, and a desire to show the world that the Middle Kingdom still ruled the seas of destiny. The Yongle Emperor, a man of ambition and anxiety, moved the capital to Beijing, built the Forbidden City, and dreamed of order so perfect it would reach beyond the horizon. To announce China's return, he ordered the creation of a fleet unlike any before or since. Ships so vast they dwarfed anything Europe would build for centuries. At their command, he placed a trusted servant who had risen from slavery to stand beside the dragon throne, Zheng He. Who was this man who would steer an empire across the edge of the known world? Zheng He was not born into privilege. He entered the world around 1371 AD in the mountains of Yunnan, far from the sea. His family were Muslims of Central Asian descent, loyal to a vanished dynasty. When the Ming armies conquered the region, the boy Zheng He, his birth name, was taken captive. He was 11. He was marched north, castrated, and placed in service to a prince. Humiliation might have broken another child. Instead, he studied the language of his captors, learned their courtly rites, and sharpened his mind to survive among power. He grew tall, commanding, curious, qualities that caught the eye of his master, Zhu Di, the future Yongle Emperor. When Zhu Di seized the throne through civil war, Zheng He fought beside him and was rewarded with a new name, Zheng He, a symbol of trust and transformation. The boy who had once been property became the sword hand of the emperor. From mountain captivity to imperial palaces, his life already spanned the extremes of the known world. Emperor Yongle ruled with both grandeur and unease. He had taken the throne from his nephew and feared the gods might question his legitimacy. He needed proof that heaven favored his reign. He would find that proof not in war, but in wonder. He commanded that China's greatness be carried upon the sea, to proclaim virtue, collect tribute, and remind foreign kings that the dragon throne watched even beyond the monsoon. It was not conquest he sought, but recognition, a cosmic order with China at the center. For this mission, he needed a man both loyal and worldly, one who could bow to emperors yet speak with sultans. He chose Zheng He. The Admiral's new task was nothing less than to redraw the boundaries of civilization. Along the Yangtze River at Longjiang shipyard, the empire bent timber and iron to its will. Over 30,000 workers carved forests into hulls and stitched acres of sailcloth. The largest vessels, called treasure ships, stretched more than 400 feet long, 9 masts high, displacing entire villages worth of tonnage. They carried porcelain, silk, and jade, also interpreters, scribes, astrologers, and soldiers. Each voyage was a floating city, a civilization on water. European caravels of the future would seem like toys beside them. But the Ming were not racing toward discovery. They were confirming what they already believed, that all under heaven revolved around the Middle Kingdom. In the summer of 1405, drums rolled through Nanjing. The first sails rose like clouds. The world's greatest navy was ready to move. 600 years before GPS, Zheng He set out with maps drawn in brush and memory, following the trade winds through the South China Sea toward Champa, Java, and the Straits of Malacca. The fleet's movement was a ballet of discipline, hundreds of rudders turning as one beneath banners of red and gold. They carried no missionaries, no colonists, no claim of conquest. Instead, they brought silk, porcelain, and letters of friendship, sealed with imperial dragons. Ports that welcomed them received gifts. ports that resisted learned how easily diplomacy could turn to thunder. At Palembang in Sumatra, Zheng He crushed pirates who preyed on merchants, restoring safe passage to the seas. By the time the fleet reached Calicut on India's western coast, its reputation had preceded it. Local rulers sent envoys aboard bearing spices, pearls, and exotic birds. To Europe, the world was still a mystery. To China, it had just become smaller and more certain of its own center. Across 7 voyages, Zheng He's sails touched Ceylon, Aden, and the Horn of Africa. In the court of Malindi in East Africa, he received a living gift, a giraffe, so alien that the Ming believed it to be a kelin, a divine beast of peace. When the animal bowed before Emperor Yongle in Nanjing, courtiers wept. Heaven itself, they said, had acknowledged his rule. The expeditions returned with more than cargo. They brought back knowledge, new maps, star charts, medicinal herbs, and stories of lands beyond imagination. For a brief, golden moment, China stood at the pinnacle of maritime power, its presence felt from the Spice Islands to the Swahili coast. But how long can curiosity survive under an empire that fears disorder more than it loves discovery? When Emperor Yongle died in 1424 AD, the sea lost its champion. His successors saw danger where he had seen glory. The court faction of Confucian scholars argued that true virtue lay not beyond the horizon, but within the Great Wall. The fleets were costly, the sailors unruly, and the world outside uncertain. Zheng He, aging and ill, was recalled, then sent out once more for a final voyage. He obeyed, though he knew the spirit of the age had turned. The empire that had mastered the seas would soon forbid its own people to sail them. What becomes of a dream when an empire decides it no longer needs the horizon? The 7th voyage, 1431 AD. At 60 years old, Zheng He returned to sea once more. His hair had grayed, his legs ached from years aboard the rolling decks. Yet his loyalty to the Ming throne was unbroken. The fleet was smaller now, its sails patched, its crews drawn from memory more than command. Still, the Admiral bowed to the compass, lifted his arm, and signaled the last great departure from Nanjing. The route stretched across the Indian Ocean toward Arabia and East Africa. He delivered envoys, exchanged gifts, and reaffirmed the Ming presence, where the world still remembered their banners. But the tone had changed. Where the first voyage had thundered with pride, this one moved like a pilgrimage. Some records claim he died on the return voyage, buried at sea beneath the waves he once ruled. Others say his body reached Nanjing, laid to rest in a quiet Muslim tomb overlooking the river. No matter which is true, his horizon was the same, the endless meeting of water and sky. After Zheng He's death, the tide of history changed course. The Ming court, anxious over cost and corruption, declared the ocean a danger to moral order. Shipyards fell silent. The great logs that had once built treasure ships were now forbidden to leave forests. Explorers were branded smugglers, sailors became farmers. Imperial edicts banned private trade, closing harbors that had once connected half the world. Charts and logs of Zheng He's routes were locked away and, in time, destroyed. An empire that had circled the globe in confidence began to fear the very water it had mastered. While China dismantled its fleets, Europe was just beginning to build them. Decades later, sailors from Portugal and Spain would call their discoveries firsts. They would round Africa, cross the Atlantic, and rename the oceans. Yet 100 years before Columbus set sail in 1492 AD, Chinese charts had already mapped those same currents and stars. When Europe spoke of the age of discovery, China had already turned its gaze inward, content to let memory fade. The story of Zheng He became half legend, half silence, a ghost inside an archive. Historians would debate the scale of his ships, the distance of his journeys, even whether he reached beyond Africa's coast, but none doubt what he represented, a civilization at its most open, looking outward with curiosity instead of fear. The truth is not measured in miles sailed, but in how far a mind can travel before authority calls it home. Imagine if those fleets had continued, if Ming harbors had welcomed the world instead of closing to it, if the maps Zheng He carried had guided centuries of exchange between East and West before cannon and colonization drew the lines instead. History is not what happened, it's what survived. And in that survival, we can glimpse the world that might have been, a world connected by respect instead of conquest, diplomacy instead of division. But no voyage, no matter how grand, can outlive the will that sustains it. Today, Zheng He's name is spoken again, in museums, in maritime academies, in the ports where his anchors once struck seabed. China honors him as a symbol of peaceful exploration, a sailor who crossed boundaries not for empire but for understanding. When curiosity dies, empire begins to decay. Across the world, replicas of his treasure ships rise in dry dock, tourists stare upward in disbelief, and historians still argue over how one man from a landlocked province commanded the greatest armada on Earth. What they agree on is simpler. He proved that the horizon was never the end of the world, only the beginning of imagination. The South China Sea is crowded again. Tankers, cargo ships, satellite-guided vessels tracing digital lines across waters once ruled by wind and instinct. Somewhere beneath those waves, the sea may still cradle the timber of the treasure fleet, buried under coral and time. Standing on a modern quay, you can still feel it, the hum of departure, the pull of distance. Some remember Zheng He as the navigator who found the world, and then lost it. The ships are gone, the sea remains, and every voyage since, no matter its flag, sails in the wake of a man who saw beyond maps. Decades later, as China turned its back on the sea, it built instead toward the mountains. Stone by stone, it raised a wall so vast it could be seen from the sky. A monument not to reach the world, but to keep it out. That, too, would become legend. Join us on our next episode of Mini History, where we journey to the creation of the Great Wall of China.